Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are going to be looking at this book by Applebaum. It's called Twilight of Democracy, The Seductive Lure of Authoritarianism. And let me tell you, this book was a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah, I can see why. Even just the title, right? The Seductive Lure of Authoritarianism.
It's a lot, but you know what? It really sums up what Applebaum is getting at here. Like, why are we seeing so many people abandon liberal democracy
Right.
and, embracing authoritarianism?
Yeah, that's a big question these days, isn't it?
Huge. And what I thought was really cool is how she uses her own experiences. I mean, she lived through this stuff in post-communist Poland.
Right.
To show how this shift happens. And what's really crazy? These are people she knew. People who seemed like they were all in on democracy, but then they slowly started embracing this illiberalism. It's wild. Some of them even got caught up in these crazy conspiracy theories.
Well, she does go beyond just the usual explanations.
Right.
Like the usual stuff people point to, like economic problems. Right.
Social unrest, all that. She really digs into the psychology of people who find themselves drawn to these strongman leaders.
Totally. And that's what hooked me. It was just so different from other books I had read about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So she structures the book as these case studies.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. She starts with Poland, obviously. Then she goes to Hungary, then Britain, and then finally the U.S.
Wow, covering a lot of ground.
She is. And with each one, she paints this really vivid picture of how this democratic backsliding can happen. And it often starts so subtly, you don't even realize it's happening.
Right. Yeah.
So let's start with Poland, since that's where she starts.
Okay.
So she opens with this scene, right? A New Year's Eve party in 1999. It's just 10 years after the fall of communism.
Wow. So the mood must have been, oh, you can feel it. She describes all these intellectuals, journalists, politicians, all these people who are at the forefront of the fight for freedom.
Yeah.
And there's this sense of optimism, this feeling that democracy has won and a new era is beginning. It's palpable.
I can only imagine. What a moment in history.
Totally. But here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Fast forward a few years. And many of these same people from that party, they become supporters of this party.
Oh, wow.
The Law and Justice Party. It's a right-wing populist movement. And it has basically been dismantling democratic norms in Poland. I was shocked.
Really?
Yeah, and it really shows you how quickly things can change.
Yeah.
How people who were once champions of liberal values can become so disillusioned to the point where they turn towards a more authoritarian path.
Yeah.
I mean, it's scary.
It is. And what's really interesting about Applebaum's approach is that she doesn't just tell their stories.
Right.
She gives us this nuanced look at why, at their motivations, the tactics they used, all the factors that went into that shift in thinking.
It's like a political thriller or something.
I can see that.
You're reading about these people, you're just wait, what happened here?
Yeah.
How did this happen?
Right.
So one of the most striking examples is this guy, Jacek Kurski. He was a teenage activist with the Solidarity movement.
Yeah.
Fighting against communist rule. You would think this guy would be a diehard defender of democracy. Right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. With that background, for sure.
Well, years later, he becomes the director of state television under the Law and Justice government.
Right.
And he uses his position to spread propaganda, to attack his political opponents.
Wow. It just goes to show you, even people who fought for freedom can be seduced by power. It's kind of unsettling, isn't it?
Yeah. It's you think someone with that background would be immune to those authoritarian urges.
Yeah.
But it shows you how insidious this stuff can be.
It really does.
And then there's this whole thing about the Smolensk lie. Have you heard of that?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so in 2010, there was this plane crash in Smolensk, Russia.
Oh, right.
The Polish president was killed, Lech Kaczynski. It was a huge national tragedy.
Absolutely.
But instead of trying to find the truth about what happened,
Yeah.
the Law and Justice Party, led by Kaczynski's twin brother, Jaroslaw,
Okay.
they started promoting this lie, like a total fabrication, that the crash was a deliberate attack orchestrated by their political rival.
Oh, wow. They use this tragedy to...
I know. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
It's like they turned a national tragedy into a conspiracy theory just to gain more power.
It's chilling, using misinformation like that.
I know.
To undermine democratic institutions.
Exactly.
It's something we've seen before, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it's scary how effective it can be.
Well, the Law and Justice Party used this lie to stoke fear and distrust, to create this us versus them mentality.
Yeah.
And then they used that to consolidate their control over the media and the judiciary. They even went after Applebaum herself, like accusing her of being a foreign agent because she was critical of what they were doing.
Wow. So they were silencing anyone who dared to question their narrative.
Exactly. Even someone who'd have been living in Poland and seeing all of this firsthand.
That's wild.
So from there, Applebaum takes us to Hungary.
Oh, okay.
But before we jump into that, I just need a minute to process this. What you just described about Poland, it's a lot.
It is. It's heavy stuff.
It's like something out of a dystopian novel.
I know what you mean.
And it makes you wonder, if it can happen there, could it happen anywhere?
Yeah,
You know?
right. It really makes you think, it is a cautionary tale. And it shows just how fragile democracies can be, especially when the people in power are willing to, exploit people's fears, manipulate information, silence dissent. And it's not just limited to one country or even one political ideology.
Right. Like what we're going to see in Hungary.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, let's dive into Hungary then. I'm ready.
All right. So in Hungary, Applebaum really focuses on Viktor Orban and his Fidesz party. They've been in power since 2010. Orban, he's this really charismatic and clever politician, and he's systematically dismantled democratic checks and balances while promoting what he calls illiberal democracy.
Illiberal democracy. What is that?
Yeah, it's this term that's become more common lately. It basically describes a system where, they hold elections, but they chip away at the core principles of liberal democracy, like the rule of law, freedom of the press, protecting minority rights, all that. It's basically democracy in name only.
Ah, I see. So they're kind of playing by a different set of rules, but still holding elections to make it look legit.
Exactly. And one of the big players in Orban's rise is this historian, Maria Schmidt. She runs this museum now that basically whitewashes Hungary's past, downplays their collaboration with the Nazis and the Soviets. She's got a lot of influence, shaping public opinion, promoting this nationalist narrative that Orban uses.
So she's rewriting history to fit their agenda.
Pretty much.
That's messed up.
It is. And get this. Her own son graduated from this university, the Central European University, real bastion of liberal education. And guess what? She later campaigned against it.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. And they ended up forcing it out of Hungary under Orban.
Wow. That's some serious hypocrisy.
It is. And it makes you wonder, right?
About
the people who support these illiberal movements. Are they really true believers? Or is it about something else? Personal gain, resentment, whatever. It's something Applebaum explores throughout the book.
It makes you think. So what else did Orban do to, grab more power?
Oh, he's good at this tactic. It's called whataboutism. Basically, you deflect any criticism by pointing out the flaws of your opponent. Even if those flaws have nothing to do with what you're being criticized for. It's like saying, yeah, we might be doing some shady stuff, but look at what they're doing. They're way worse.
Oh, I've heard that one. It's like that saying, two wrongs don't make a right.
Exactly. But it's a really effective way to shut down debate, avoid accountability.
It is.
And Orban used it masterfully. Whenever someone criticized his government for becoming more authoritarian, he'd just point to some problem in the West, immigration, economic inequality, whatever. And he'd argue that Hungary was just doing things differently, more in line with their national identity.
So he was appealing to this sense of national pride.
Yes.
Even if it meant abandoning democratic principles.
Exactly. He built this narrative of Hungary as a victim.
Yeah.
Of Western hypocrisy and meddling, and that helped him rally support for his agenda.
It's amazing how these tactics work, how they can manipulate people like that. It's a good reminder to always think critically, question what we hear, be wary of anyone who tries to use our fears and prejudices for their own benefit.
Absolutely. And that's something we'll see, again, as we move on to Britain, how these same themes play out in totally different context, but with similar consequences for democracy.
Okay, so what's happening across the pond?
So in Britain, Applebaum dives into, the whole Brexit thing.
Oh, yeah, Brexit.
Yeah. And the forces behind it, of course, Brexit's complicated, right?
Oh, yeah.
Tons of factors involved. But Applebaum's point is that it kind of reflects this bigger trend,
What is
this disillusionment with the modern world, all its complexities. And there's this yearning for a simpler time, a more romanticized past,
So it wasn't just about leaving the EU, it was about something deeper, like a feeling of loss, wanting to go back to something that's gone.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where someone like Boris Johnson comes in.
Oh, Boris.
Yeah. Applebaum, she contrasts his earlier views on the EU, he was pro-EU,
Right.
with his later embrace of Brexit.
Right.
And her argument is he basically flipped to, further his own ambitions.
Interesting.
Like he tapped into that desire for a strong leader, someone who'd shake things up, restore national pride, kind of like Orban in Hungary.
It's funny how that keeps coming up, this charismatic strongman figure.
Yeah.
They seem to know how to exploit people's anxieties, their frustrations. Offer these simple solutions to really complex problems.
Right.
But it's never that simple, is it?
Nope. And those simple solutions usually have a hidden cost, like eroding democratic norms, suppressing anyone who disagrees, power getting concentrated in the hands of just a few.
And in the case of Brexit, what was the cost? Like, what happened after this shift toward a more nostalgic, nationalistic view?
Well, one big thing was polarization.
Division.
Yeah, exactly. British society became way more divided. That referendum, it created this huge rift between the Leave and Remain sides, and it's only gotten worse since then.
It's like it exposed these underlying tensions that were already there, just brought them to the surface.
Right, and then politicians and the media, they jumped on that, using divisive language, fear-mongering, all that, to get people on their
The
side.
classic divide and conquer.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it worked.
It did.
And, this isn't unique to Britain. We see this polarization everywhere these days, including, well, the U.S.
Yeah, speaking of the U.S., that's where Applebaum goes next, right?
Right.
I'm a little nervous to hear what she has to say about us.
I get it. But her analysis of the U.S. is really interesting and, yeah, a bit unsettling. She sees the rise of Trumpism as a reflection of what we've been talking about, this appeal of strongman leaders, eroding trust in institutions, the spread of, misinformation, conspiracy theories, all that.
It's like a global pandemic of illiberalism, spreading everywhere, fueled by social media and the fact that, we don't have those traditional gatekeepers of information anymore. But how did it happen here in the U.S.? We've got this long history of democracy, a strong constitution, checks and balances. You'd think we'd be immune to this.
You'd think so, right?
Right.
But Applebaum's point is that no democracy is immune. Not really. And with the U.S., her argument is that Trump is able to tap into something that's been brewing for a while, this anti-establishment sentiment. He brought together these elements from both the far right and the far left, and it became this powerful force.
So it wasn't just about Trump himself. It was about something deeper, something in the American psyche that made him appealing.
Exactly. And she points to some pretty striking examples, like Trump's admiration for Putin, his America First thing, his constant attacks on the media, the courts, anyone who disagreed with him.
Yeah. It's like he was following the authoritarian playbook to a T. Discredit your opponents. Sow distrust. Appeal to people's fears.
Exactly. And it worked. He got this incredibly loyal following. People who were willing to overlook, everything. Lies, the corruption, the way he acted, because they felt he was fighting for them.
It's so frustrating. It feels like we're going backwards, abandoning the very values that made the U.S. a model for democracy in the first place.
Yeah, I understand that feeling. And Applebaum, she shares that frustration. She's not just some detached observer. She cares deeply about what's happening to democracy here in the U.S. and globally.
But if this is happening everywhere, in countries with such different histories, different cultures, what can we even do about it? Can we turn things around?
That's the big question, isn't it? And Applebaum doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but she does offer some really valuable insights. One key point she makes is that we need to be more vigilant, more aware of the signs that democracy is in trouble. We've got to be critical thinkers, not just believe everything we hear, and watch out for those who try to manipulate us, using our fears and prejudices for their own gain.
So it's about individual responsibility, like being informed citizens.
Yes, but it's also about collective action, supporting those institutions that promote democracy, holding our leaders accountable, having real conversations with people who see things differently, even if it's hard, and being brave enough to stand up for what's right, even when it's unpopular.
That's a tall order, especially these days. Everything's so polarized. But it also feels crucial. It's like we can't afford to just sit back and do nothing.
You're right. The stakes are high. The future of democracy depends on us being willing to engage, to resist, to defend those values we hold dear.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. This conversation has been really eye-opening and, yeah, a little scary. It makes you realize how fragile democracy is.
Yeah.
And how easily it can be undermined if we're not careful.
Yeah. And I think that's what Applebaum wants us to take away from her book. To wake us up, to realize that democracy isn't something we can just take for granted. It takes work. It takes vigilance. And it takes a willingness to defend it against those who want to destroy it.
So what's the main message here? What should listeners remember from this deep dive into Twilight of Democracy?
I think it's this. Democracy. It's not some guarantee. It's not just going to be there forever. We got to work for it, protect it, nurture it, you know? And that starts with understanding like what we're up against, the threats.
Right.
And that's what's so great about this book. It's like a wake-up call. Applebaum saying, hey, look around, see what's happening. She wants us to recognize how democracies crumble,
Wow.
you know, the tactics these people use, and our own responsibility in protecting what we've got.
So it's not about freaking out. It's about being aware, informed, knowing what's at stake, and being ready to participate, to defend it, you know?
Exactly. And one way to be informed, learn from others who've been through it. That's what Applebaum does so well in this book. She's not just throwing around theories. It's real-world examples like we've been talking about.
Right.
And those examples, as scary as they can be,
Yeah.
they can help us see those same patterns, maybe even in our own countries, our own communities.
It's like a guide, right? Spotting the warning signs. So we're not caught off guard.
Totally. And she also talks about how seductive this stuff can be, authoritarianism.
Yeah.
Yeah, it taps into this desire people have for things to be simple, for a strong leader to just fix everything, this sense of belonging, of identity. And when people are scared, uncertain, those appeals, they really work.
That's true. We tend to think of people who support authoritarians as, like, clueless or whatever. It's more complicated than that, right?
Oh, more. They're responding to real fears, frustrations. We need to understand that, not just write them off.
Yeah. So where we go from here, if we're going to push back against this, defend democracy, what do we do?
That's where it gets tough. It's not enough to just say, hey, authoritarianism is bad. We need to offer something better. A vision of a society that's free, but also just. Values individual rights, but also looks out for everyone.
So building something better, something that can resist that pull towards authoritarianism.
Exactly. A society where people feel heard, where they have a say, where they actually believe democracy can work for them.
That sounds like a huge challenge,
Yeah.
especially with all the division these days.
It is. It takes commitment to dialogue, to compromise, finding common ground. It's messy, it's hard, but it's the only way we're going to see democracy truly thrive, not just barely hang on.
Well, that's actually really hopeful. It's a reminder that even with everything going on, there's still hope. We can turn things around, and it starts with each of us being willing to learn, to engage, to fight for what we believe in.
I couldn't agree more.
So for anyone listening, if you're feeling kind of overwhelmed or discouraged by the state of things, pick up this book, Twilight of Democracy. It's a tough read, but it's so important it'll help you understand what we're dealing with, and it might even inspire you to get involved in your community, in your country, wherever, to fight for democracy.
It'll also remind you that you're not alone. There are so many people out there all over the world who are working to protect democracy, to build a better future, and together we can actually make a difference.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Twilight of Democracy. We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little inspiring. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.